Okay, so we are going to do a little tutorial today. I'm going to just start this one off. I'm going to do a new project, and as this thing loads up, I'll explain what we're doing. This is going to be a 2D project. We can call it Project 2. And here we go. So what we're going to do today is a little bit more than we did yesterday with images. So we're going to work with images, but we're also going to put some keystrokes behind it so that we can use the arrows to move objects around the screen. So a couple of things as we're working our way through these Unity tutorials, things that I always try to figure out when I'm working on a new game engine or any environment is how to show images, how to move them around, how to get input from the keyboard or from the mouse, and how to put text on the screen, and those are and then audio. So those are the basic things that I look for when we're doing stuff. So we're kind of walking through those stages right now. So we know how to put images on the screen from the first video, and now we're going to look at how to get input from the system so that we can move them around a little bit, and then we'll move on to other things. So our project is open. Remember, we did a new 2D project, so if your screen looks slightly different than this, usually with a when you have the 3D defaults, you'll see like a horizon line in the back. If you did that, the best idea is to just kind of close your project and start a new one, because there's a lot of defaults that get set for 2D working. Even though right here there is a 2D button, I was just clicking on here, that will change our view from 2D to 3D, but there is a lot more to it than just clicking that button. So if your screen doesn't look like this and it's got that horizon line, I would close your project, start a new one, and make sure you select 2D as the defaults. Okay, so here's our scene, and remember this white rectangle is what our camera is seeing. And if I right click, I can kind of pan around to see more of our view, and you'll see me doing that from time to time, just right clicking. And then the scroll wheel will scroll us in and out like this, zoom in and out on what we're seeing. And remember this rectangle here, when we go to our game tab, that's what we're actually going to see with this ugly blue color. So I'm going to go through some of the stuff we did before. I'm going to click on our main camera over here, and the properties on the right side, just so you know where I'm at, I'm over in this area. I'm going to click on the background color here and switch that to something that's a lot nicer, because I don't like that blue color. There we go. And the idea of this example is we're going to drag in some images, well, just one image, and then we'll use the arrow keys to move it around. And we'll write a little bit of scripting, but not a whole lot, and it'll get you a little bit of access to what happens when we script, because it's not that hard. Okay, so I'm going to go to my glitch assets, and I'm just going to grab something here. Let's see, make this a little bit easier for me to figure out what it is that I'm moving around. Doesn't matter what we put in, any image is going to be fine. How about this exit sign? That looks nice. So I'm going to drag it. I dragged it from my Explorer over here into my Assets window. If you're using it on a Mac, you'll just drag from the Finder down over here. It's the same thing. And remember, because it's down here in our Assets area, it doesn't mean that it's actually in our scene until we drag it up here like this. And then it's actually there. And so if I hit the play button up here at the top, we'll see that there's our sign and things are working great. And we can also click over to the Game tab to figure out what's going on. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to add the ability to hold down the right arrow and have this exit sign move to the right. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to do that through a little script. So this may be the first time that you're writing software. Don't worry about it. You'll see that it's not so bad. Take your time and type in exactly what I'm typing in. And if it doesn't work, go back to the video, pause it, and look and make sure that everything is the same. So in order to make a script to move this thing, I am going to right-click. I'm down here in Assets. Right-click, Create, C# Script. And it's generating a file down here right now. And as you can see, we can type in here. I'm going to say MoveObject as the name of the script, and then I'll hit enter. So when this thing first created a new object, a new down here, a new C# script, we were able to change the name, and I changed it to MoveObject. And notice that there is no space in the file name. So when you're creating these scripts, don't use spaces. And outside of that, you should be fine. And I want to show you something. If yours looks like this and you've got MoveObject down here and you just click once on the script to select it and you look over here on the right and it says MoveObject in this area, then you are good to go. A lot of people will make a mistake, well, not necessarily a mistake, but go too quickly, and they'll have something down here that says MoveObject. I'm down here in Assets, it says MoveObject. But then when they look over here, it says something else, like new mono behavior or some kind of weird thing. It doesn't say MoveObject right in this spot. So let me show you how that happens. If I right-click, create C# script, and then I just click out of here, what's going to happen is this file is going to be named new behavior, and over here on the right it's going to say new behavior script. And then if you want to rename this to, we can call it MoveObject 2 just for example. Over here it'll still say new behavior script even though the name on this thing is MoveObject 2. And so when you have a difference between how the file is named and what this says right here, which happens to be the name of the class, you're going to run into problems later. And I'll show you how to fix that, but I just want to show you that because that is something that some people will run into just by clicking too quickly. And so if that is you, you can just delete. You can right-click over here and just delete it and say, yeah, we'll delete. And then you can right-click and do another create C# script, and that time do it correctly. So just something to watch out for. But I'm going to double-click on this MoveObject, and it's going to open up Visual Studio and give us our source code for our great project. And this is our source code, and it is a definition of a class, which we called MoveObject because that's what this thing is going to do, is move stuff around. These things are called functions right here. Start function gets called when the program starts, gets called once, and update, as it even tells us right here, is called once per frame. And by default, our system is running at 60 frames a second, so this update function is going to be called 60 times every second. So these are the two default functions. There's a lot more that you can put in. You can write your own. You can use default ones. But these are the ones that come in the script when we start off. So I'm just going to leave these in here like this. Maybe I'll zoom in just a little bit on them to make it a little bit bigger and easier to read. I don't think we're going to put anything in the start function, so we could delete it, but I'm just going to leave it in there for now. It's not hurting anything. So we're going to look at update. This is going to be our main function that we'll be writing our software in today. And let's think about, if I go back to Unity, what do we want to have happen? We want to, if we press the right arrow, we want to have this thing move to the right. And I'm going to select the crosshair right here. And essentially we want it to do this. We want it to move only in the right. We don't want it to go up and down. And that's where we want it to go. And if we look at what's happening, and I'm over here. So as I'm dragging this thing to the right, we'll see our x value is increasing. If I go all the way to the left, it's going to go down. As I move to the right, the x value of position is going up. And that's all we want to do. So if a person is pressing the right arrow, we want to increase the x value. And that's going to make our little object move to the right. And it's always good to make notes to yourself. So we're going to say, and I'll explain why I'm putting this in here. If you want to make notes to yourself, which I recommend, you can type in these 2 slashes like that. And that tells the system to ignore what you're typing in. It's called a comment. So I'm going to type my 2 slashes, and I'm going to say if the right arrow is pressed, we're going to move the object to the right. That's what we want to do. Now I put this line inside of update because update seems like a very good place to check for the right arrow being pressed, because update is called 60 times a second. So if we put this check inside of update, then 60 times a second, we're going to check and see if the right arrow is being pressed, and if it is, we're going to move a little bit to the right, and if we let go of the right arrow, we're going to stop and we're not going to move it anymore. So this is a really good place to put this software. So we've got two things we got to do. If the right arrow is pressed, move the object to the right. So these are the two things. And I'm going to break them up into pieces. So I just hit enter and then put 2 slashes in front of the line. So let's figure out how are we going to write software to do this. We're going to use something called an if statement, which is what we wrote out in English. And I'm going to type it in because it's slightly cryptic, but it's not that bad once you see it. So I'm going to say if input dot get key get key code dot right arrow, and then we'll open a curly brace. So this is the first thing. If the right arrow is pressed, we say that in English, then we figure out how to write the code. And this is the code for it. This whole piece right here, all of that. And I always recommend writing what you're trying to do in English first, and then writing the code afterwards. It makes it a lot easier to figure it out. If all you're doing is trying to type in code, you're going to have a lot of stuff that doesn't work, and you're going to be very confused. But if you know, I'm trying to do this, and it doesn't work, then it makes it really easy for somebody to help you out as well, because they can look at it and see, what are you trying to do, and then let's just look at the code and make it do it. So translating this into C# for Unity, we're going to say if, and then we have all these parentheses. Make sure you get all those right. So if input.getKey, which key is being pressed, keycode.right arrow, then inside of this little block here between these two curly braces, we can put our code to act upon this. And I'm going to move this comment. I'm going to Control X it and then Control V it and put it inside of here, because we're going to do the moving inside of these two curly braces. Okay, so our first statement, and I guess I should say in total we're writing about 5 lines of code. So we are really, really close to being done. So here we are. We know that the person is pressing the right arrow. And now what do we want to do? We want to move the object to the right. And sometimes we have to make a little bit more descriptions. What do we actually mean by move the object to the right? If we come back here, back to our example in Unity, and this thing is sliding across the right, what we want to do is we want to change the X value of the position. We want to increment it. We want to make it bigger. We want to increase it. That's what we want to do. So I'm going to go back to our code. And I'm going to put another comment. And we want to increase the X position. And all of these little things that we're doing helps us try to figure out what that one magic line of code is, or that two magic lines of code, whatever it is. Okay, so we want to move the object to the right. Another way to say that is we want to increase the X position. And I'm going to go back over here again. And I'm going to say something about the X position is part of the transform. Okay, X position, which is part of the transform. And all I did was just read. All I did was read. I went over here and looked at the numbers that were changing and typed in all kinds of clues about the section, which is transform, that it's the position, and that it's the X value of the position that's changing. So that helps me keep organized. And the more of these kinds of comments you write down, the more organized you're going to be, and the easier it is going to be to not get lost. And maybe if you're good at coding, you don't have to do that for these small things, but I always get in the habit of doing it, even if it's simple, because when you get to more complex things, you have to logically think through all of the steps, and getting in the habit of doing this is very, very useful. Okay, so we want to move the object to the right. We want to increase the X position, which is part of the transform. Okay, so first we're going to do another comment. I want to know what is our current position. Then we will increment it. Then we will update. So that's the 3 steps that we're going to do. So again, we haven't really written any code. I'm just thinking through the process very slowly, because the more time we think about what we're doing, the easier it's going to be to write the code, and the higher the chances are that it's going to work the very first time. Okay, so we need to get our current position. So I will say our position here has all these components, x, y, and z. Okay, and so we're going to save off what our current position is, and then we'll add a little bit to x, and then we will update our actual position. So this x and y has two components, and so that's known as a vector2. So I'm going to say vector2 position, which is our name of our variable, equals transform.position. And with some of this stuff too, you can just type it in, and maybe you just don't care about the understanding behind it, and that's perfectly okay. You can just type this stuff in, and you'll be fine. But I'll explain what all this stuff means behind it every time we do it. So eventually it'll start to make more sense, and as you do this stuff more often, you'll start to invent your own ways of typing this stuff in. But anyways, so this is going to hold our current x and y. That's the value that we are currently at. And then we'll say position, oops, dot x equals position dot x plus 0.1 f. Okay, so that means we're going to take the x component of position, this, and we are going to add 0.1. So here's our numbers here. This is a 2.62. This is a 2.65. So every 60 times a second, we are going to add 0.1. This f means float, means it's a decimal number, 0.1, 0.2, not whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we put this f at the end to indicate that it's a float. All right, so let's see. What is our current position? That's this. Increment, which is this. Move this up. And then what's left is to update, and we're done. So then we'll say transform.position equals position. So this last line, update, is actually updating this transform position after we've added 0.01 or 0.1 to it. And that's it. That's our code. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines. And I'm going to save it with Control S. And I'm going to go back. And now we have our wonderful code. If you've got some kind of problems, you will see messages down here. So let me show you. Like if I forgot the plus sign, down here at the bottom, it's going to give us all kinds of issues. Oh, you've got a problem on line. This first thing right here tells you have a problem on line 25. So you can go back and say, oh, here's line 25. Oh, yeah, it's got some kind of problem. Here's a red squiggle. I forgot my plus sign. And then I'll save it. And if I go back, this little error should clear. And notice as I was clicking around, it switched us to the console tab. I can go back to project. So I can switch between these two. Okay, so now that we're reasonably sure that this thing has no errors, we need to apply it to something. We could have hundreds of images on here. We only want one to move when we're pushing the right arrow. So what we need to do is we need to associate this script with the object that we want to move. So I'm going to click up here under our scene. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag our MoveObject over here to the right in this empty gray rectangle. So I'm going to click and drag it over there. And now the script is associated with this object because here it is, MoveObject script. So now if I hit play and I hit the right arrow, we see it moving. So I'm going to unplay it, play it again. There it goes. Another trick here, now that the play button actually has some use for us, some people will play and then pause and then go back and start updating things. That's really a powerful move, but if you don't know what you're doing, it can cause lots of problems because what will happen is if you have this thing set up like this, play and pause, any of the changes that you make, when you unplay it like this, it gets undone, and you'll lose all your work. So get in the habit of playing, and then when you're done playing, hitting play again. Because then you won't lose any work. There's times when this pause button is very, very useful, but until you want to do that on purpose, I would never press it. So always just hit play, right arrow, and then unplay. Pretty cool, huh? So there you go. Now let's go back and look at our code. What would happen, to save some space, I'm going to delete some of this stuff. What would happen if we wanted to move things left? Well, I always like to take stuff that's working, so I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to Control C, or on a Mac, Command C, and then Control V to paste it. So we know all of this code makes us go right. So I want to make all of this code go left. So let's just start reading. If the left arrow is pressed, okay, so does this line do that? No, because it's looking for right. So I'm going to change right to left. Move the object to the left. We want to decrease the x position, right? Because if I'm watching my x value, as I slide this thing to the left, it's getting smaller. We want to decrease the x position, which is part of the transform. What is our current position? Same thing. Instead of incrementing, we want to decrement. And position.x equals position.x minus, because we want to go make it smaller, and then we update. So now this should make us go left. So if we're pressing the left arrow, we're going to do this. And if pressing the right arrow, we're going to do this. Think it's going to work? Let's see. Right arrow, left arrow. Hey, look at that. So now we can move this thing left and right. That'd be a good exercise to think about. What if you want it to go up and down? Look at what this code does. Look at the comments. Think about how it would behave differently if we were going up and down versus left and right. And you could get that all put in there. Back to Unity real quick. I'm going to Control S for save. That's going to save my project. And one thing that a lot of people run into with issues as far as saving Unity projects is they don't know where it's being saved to. So we can save it, we can go File, Save, we can do all these things, but people don't know where it is. And so when you want to turn it in or save it on a flash drive or something, you don't know where to go. A little trick is if you come down to this Assets window down here, and you just right-click anywhere that's in a blank spot, and you go to Show in Explorer, and on Mac it'll say Show in Finder. So if you right-click, go to Show in Explorer, it's going to pop up an Explorer window that shows you the exact path to where your project is. And your project is all of this stuff. You need all of it. That's your project. All of those files. It's not just one file, it's all of it. So keep that in mind. But with that, I think we're in good shape. And we've got code that moves stuff left and right. Think about how to make it go up and down. And for a first piece of software, I think this is a really, really good start. And I will zoom out so you can see the whole thing. We put everything inside of update. Oh, one more thing I want to show you before I go. We got all kinds of time. It's okay. So if you notice, when we're moving this thing left and right, it is going at a certain speed. And that speed is based directly on this value here. So if I make it 0.01, it's going to go slower because it's moving smaller increments. See how slow that's going? And so coming in here and changing the code is definitely going to work, but it's really nice if you look at the properties inside of Unity. It would be nice to be able to just change the speed by typing a number in a box like this. That would be super helpful. And we can do that really easily by, instead of typing in this number in 2 different spots, and maybe if we're going up and down, there's 4 different spots, if we make this what's called variable. So I'm going to come all the way up here to the top. And I'm going to say public float speed equals 0.1f. Okay, so I put it right here at the very top as soon as the class starts, right here. And what that means is instead of this 0.1f that we have down here, I can just type in speed. And down in this one, I can type in speed. And because this variable is public, and we can talk more about what public variables are, but if you don't know what a public variable is, don't worry about it. All you need to know is type it in. And if I save it, remember to save. None of these changes inside Visual Studio take effect until you save it. So I'm hitting Control S quite often. Then I come back to Unity and I click on my sign here. And then over on the right side, I'm in this MoveObject script. And you'll see that now we have a speed variable that tells us how fast we're going to go. So if I want to make it go faster, I could say 2.2. And if I hit play, it's going really fast. And then if I unplay it and I want it to go slow, I can make it 0.01. And the cool thing is I'm changing it in one spot, but it's making it change. Oops, I made it to 0. 0.01. There we go. So now it's going really slow, but it's going really slow for both left and right. So changing it in one spot is changing it for both directions. And so that's a really good use of variables. And it's a good use for public variables too, because now they're exposed to the editor. And so that's one of the really powerful things about Unity, is that people who like to write code, they could write all of this code. But for an end user, or like a game designer or a user interface designer who doesn't care about this code, they will know that they have access to this one variable here, speed, and they can change the functionality or the appearance or how things work just by tweaking numbers here in the interface, which makes it really cool. But I think it's important for everybody to understand how this source code is written, because it really isn't that hard. And how you think about it. How you think about it's probably the hardest part. Getting these lines in here about what it is that you're trying to do, then it's a matter of just translating that to computer talk. But this is the hard part of thinking about how do I get it to do what I want it to do. So I think that's going to end it for this second video in the series, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you check out the next ones.